Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Anan Hassan here, and he is an investor and an entrepreneur. He's doing the creation of small state asset classes, and he has a thesis around asteroids, dinosaurs, and mycelium. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for having me on.
Yeah. So mycelium is super interesting. The connection between fungi from the trees. Did I get that right? What's going on with the mycelium?
Yeah, so the big picture backing my investment thesis is billions of years of evolutionary data. And if you had asked the dinosaur before the asteroid struck, hey, buddy, how long do you think you're going to be around? And the dinosaur would have looked at you in complete shock and saying, look, I've been around for 180 million years. I'm going to be around forever. So the meteor struck and the dinosaur went extinct. And however, life didn't go extinct. Marsupials, toothless birds, ants, bees, even cockroaches, and mycelium made it out to the other side. And that's been quite an interesting phenomena, that when big shocks happen, size is not an advantage. Adaptability, flexibility, resilience, not having single points of failure, autonomy. So if you look at the way that the systems that make it out of big shocks, they have common characteristics. And mycelium, of course, also demonstrates this very well, which is whether it's the individual, if you look at the individual ant even, I mean, the individual ant is basically scurries around autonomously. I mean, does his own thing. But if he sees another ant going by, it's like this high five and a little buzz. And hey, buddy, you know, there's a bunch of proteins lying over there. Go check it out. In fact, I've even left a little scent trail. Just follow it and just pass the word around. So what's fascinating is, and before you know it, you see this line of ants going over to that garbage dump or that dead fly. Systems that survive over periods of time, especially after shocks, have common characteristics that they are autonomous, but they are networked, they're cooperative, they're resilient, they are adaptable, and they don't have single points of failure. And that's billions of years of evolutionary data. So if we actually want to learn from that, then those are the characteristics that we need in systems. And if you look at the era that we're in right now, where the rule-based global order that we had set up after the Second World War, with the sort of the UN as being the political institution, the IMF being the currency institution, the World Bank being the finance and development, and the WTO being the trade, all of them are wobbling. And they were already wobbling. And under the current framework, especially the country that actually helped establish these institutions has had some serious questions, and some may even argue is, put the drill to the foundation of these institutions. So the global system, there's nobody who will say that it's not wobbly. And if anything, it's basically finishing an era. And so the rule-based global order is certainly getting revisited. And I'll come to the investment thesis based on all of this. So that alone is a big event. I mean, we haven't had this since the Second World War. And we had before that a 400-year period of colonial systems. And then we had the sort of rule-based order built on the foundations of these four pillars. And that's wobbling. And the new order is still to get refined and defined. But there's going to be a period of chaos as a result of this change that happens. So that's a shock. The other one is the idea of currency. I mean, we basically, we had, pebbles and precious gems and iron and then metal and then coins and then paper and then gold-backed paper and then fiat. And now we've got algorithm-based money. And this has been a major, I mean, nobody can say that that's not a significant development, even if it's not a major part of the currency system as a store of value and a means of exchange. It's eaten up a bit of it for sure, right? And it's going to grow. And, do we really need, 160 currencies around the world? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, is it efficient? Is it necessary? Does every country need it? Obviously, the Europeans concluded that they don't. And so there will be some real conversations around the concepts of, what should store our value and be a means of exchange. And algorithm is going to be an important piece of that story. Now, that's a big development because we can carry, I mean, you can't carry gold, you couldn't carry the coins, you couldn't carry, all this stuff. But algorithms, I mean, they're anywhere and everywhere. So that's a pretty big development. So the rule-based global order getting revisited is a big development. The currency issue is a big development. And if the internet was huge, which it was, AIs, 10 to, whatever number you want to put X of that, right? And each one of these is a big event. And all three of them are happening simultaneously. So this is the big shock, right? And the next 3 to 5 years is going to just roll itself through the global system. And that's the asteroid. And so at this time, when the asteroid strikes, size is not an advantage. It is not advantages to be large, bureaucratic, cumbersome. It's actually swarms of network players will be far more effective at being able to make it out to the other side. So that's the underlying billions of years of data and the timing of what's happening. So if all of that is happening, the question, of course, is, and my background is in technology in Silicon Valley, finance in New York and Washington, and then sovereign funds. I've written a book on sovereign funds, so I've also been involved. And I've come from inside the institutions, meaning that I was in the senior leadership of the World Bank and helping the president. Then I spent 3 terms as a special advisor on the board of directors. So I have a pretty good understanding of what's happening in terms of the international architecture. But I also spent time early on. The first electronic trading market ever prototyped on the internet was done in October of 1994. Mark Andreessen was still starting. He was at Mosaic and had just joined, and was Mosaic hadn't even become Netscape. Eric Schmidt was at Sun before Novell and Google. Jim Clark, Mike Homer, Marty Tenenbaum, Vince Cerf, all these guys. And that project of creating this first prototype of a global electronic trading market was globally coordinated by me. So I actually was there at the beginning of this supernova that kind of exploded. And I was in my 30s, I'm 63, and I, at that point, got infected with this idea that a small group of people being at the right place at the right time could bend the arc of history, and nobody could get me off that anymore. So I see now that kind of moment come back, but this time around with even more possibilities, both positive and negative. The internet was big, AI is 10x. This global system was sort of, in this period of reflection, Cold War ending. Now we're in a full-on, revisit the entire architecture. The algorithms were only starting. Now they're, very much part of the system. So anyways, the bottom line is that we're in that big moment. The asteroid is hitting the system, and what do we do on the other side? And that's where the mycelium and everything else comes in, which is you want to basically architect something that is autonomous, network, cooperative, distributed, no single points of failure. And when you look around the world, there are about 200 states and economies in the world. 200 of them. And if you use the cutoff of population of 12 million and you use that as an arbitrary number and say, okay, how many of these 200 are countries or states with populations less than 12 million? And if you define that as a small state, and most people, sophisticated people, will sort of say, 60, 70, maybe less, around that number. That's what would you guess? Something like that, right? And go ahead.
Okay, 12 million. I like this. When you said 60 million, were you talking about?
Of the 200 states and economies in the world, if you took the cutoff of population of 12 million and defined everything below 12 million as a small state, how many of the 200 are small states? Meaning, how many of the 200 have populations of less than 12 million of the 200?
Okay, give me a second. So how many of what percentage of these? Okay, interesting.
Percentage or just a number? You can give both. I mean, is it 30 of the 200? Is it 70? Is it?
Okay, let's do 45.
45 of the 200 would be less than 12 million, meaning small states. So I'm sophisticated, right? I mean, I've done this stuff around the world. So I asked my team to look at it, get me the numbers. And they said, Mr. Hassan, sit down. They asked me for the guess. I actually came up with 70. I said 70 of the 200 are small states with this 12 million cutoff. It's 162.
Wow. Okay. Whoa. So there's a huge amount of entities out there, and they're very small.
Small states. Exactly. Yeah. And that's fascinating. That majority of the states and economies in the world are actually small states. And the architecture that we build has been around big states.
Yeah, it's so crazy. It's so interesting. There's a lot of different follow-up questions I have. Uh, I love the history. I love thinking about the 1960s and the countercultural revolution in the United States, how that led up into 1994 when you got to Silicon Valley and participated in this electronic trade market. Let's start there in the 90s, because the 90s have been very relevant recently with the rise of AI. It does feel like AI sort of takes us back, particularly to the mycelium aspect of it, because it's very decentralizing, very distributed, although the centralized players are all going to the max to centralize as soon as possible. But it's just like, there's no way I see it. I know a lot of other people see it differently, that the centralization will be successful. I think it will be successful, but compared to the distribution and the decentralization and the information age, and just like, what is a state? I don't think many people are asking what is a state. It's because we have Westphalia. We have, since the 1600s, that was kind of the nation state. I think it was 1648, somewhere around there. And now we're in this new era, and it's coming really quickly in a way that, I think a lot of people have talked about for a long time, particularly in the 1990s in Silicon Valley, right? What was going on there? Can you give us a brief?
Yeah, so I was right there, and I was quite surprised by the, in some ways, optimism, which I appreciated, but to some extent, the naivete of the optimism. The idea that we were going to basically develop these tools, we're going to take all these, tools, and we're going to throw them over the wall, and the world would be a beautiful place. And I was like, guys, I mean, you're talking to you. We're in a sandbox. We're talking to each other, and the world is not that way. And so I had this saying all the way back then, and I said, technology without philosophy. Technology without philosophy is efficiency without a purpose.
Yeah, that's what happened.
If all you did was you basically threw that out there, all you're going to do is make stuff more efficient, but you're going to make the bad stuff more efficient also. And indeed, when we look at what social media ended up doing, it basically, and what they did to political systems, I mean, we basically made disruption and loss of trust become exceptionally efficient to do. So so the idea that we would just throw these tools out there and everything's going to turn out right, we know that didn't work out, and we're making the same argument this time around, which is, you know what, don't worry, just throw the stuff out there, it's going to be a beautiful place. I think the evidence challenges that.
And they did have a philosophy, but I would say it was a poor philosophy. And it was a poor philosophy that I grew up around. So I'm very familiar with the specifics of the poor philosophy. And there's a lot of reasons why I think it's poor. I mean, one of the big ones is because it was sort of just like this total in-group cult type of thing. And, very much the extropians come to mind as sort of the most naive and also the most powerful, who have led into the effective altruist sort of thing going on currently inside the AI world. Where does AI fit into? I mean, there's so many questions, because where does AI fit into what you're talking about? We can go into the investment and the finance and stuff like that too. Because what is a state? It's just an entity with a border. Sometimes that border is harder in China. Sometimes it's softer in places like Argentina. It's just part of it's on the internet. You got Estonia, that is like a internet state. What, in your framework, what is a state?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually last week was in Tallinn in Estonia by coincidence. The state to me is basically a selfish creature. It's very very selfish, and wants to basically generally ensure that both the underneath its framework, that it has as much regulatory and other mechanisms of control that it can for managing what lies under its sovereignty. So it's very possessive. It's very selfish. It's very, in some ways, even encourages tribalism. But it's there. And we have sort of come to, since the Westphalian era, we've built our entire architecture around that. Now it's wobbling. And we created these institutions to give that structure credibility. It's wobbling, and above the state and underneath the state are other actors, and the individual is underneath the state and basically saying, hey, wait a second, I mean, I want some autonomy, I want some flexibility, I want to be able to associate with like-minded. And there's a real question. The state actually says, whoa, wait a second, I mean, I want to interfere with your rights of movement, your rights of thinking, your rights of thinking, and I'm doing it. And the best part is I'm doing it because ultimately, I'm doing it for your interest. Now, that's debatable, but at least that's the state has been.
That's the explicit goal, like to welfare state. It's for the welfare.
Irrespective if you've got the conventional European welfare states or you have sort of the alternatives. At the end of the day, the state it's a very addictive creature. It's addicted to its regulatory sovereignty, its role, its position in the international system, and but it's and the systems have been set up to basically ensure that those tools are well instituted. The problem is that the system is wobbling, and the asteroid is literally, you can feel the heat of the asteroid hitting the system on multiple fronts. So it's gonna get, I mean, there's no question about the fact that it's gonna get struck. The issue is, of course, what do you do on the other side of it, and how can you bring about that transition with the least amount of pain? And that's where billions of years of evolutionary data should be our guide, because every time these moments have happened through history, and the dinosaur era is the most interesting one, life does continue. It's a question of, how do you transition from being a dinosaur to a mycelium or, yeah.
Well, so because that mammal, I ran into this really crazy fact a couple of days ago about New Zealand, and New Zealand had no mammals. So it had one of the most interesting evolutionary, the quokka comes from New Zealand, and the quokka was just totally destroyed by the fact that it had no mammals. I guess that makes the quokka a rodent, I guess. But wait, no, rodents are mammals too. Maybe I got some of those facts wrong. There might have been some hallucinations there in the AI thing. But what I heard is that basically New Zealand had an evolutionary environment that was very particular to it. And when humans got there, for sure, then they destroyed the large 10-foot bird that is the cousin to the emu and the ostrich and the rhea, which is an interesting side trip on evolution in general. Now, like where we're headed, so we're talking about, we've got all sorts of species. You mentioned ants, you've mentioned mycelium,
bees, ants. So the bees, ants, marsupials, toothless birds, cockroaches, all of them, there are characteristics that they have that are similar that actually allow them to make it out to the other side. And essentially, it's like they're autonomous. The individual ant runs around, does his own thing. The individual mycelium does its own thing. They're cooperative. They actually do. They are not they actually share the insights that they have. The ant lets the other people know. Not only did I find that, I've left a trail for you guys to go over there and partake in the joy of the trash that I found. So the same thing with the mycelium. It shares unbelievably. This little thing with little protoplasm is actually shares innovation with the other mycelium and basically has ways of passing on information. So they're networked. They are autonomous, they're networked, they're cooperative. So they actually end up sharing information, and they help the colony, if you would, while being autonomous, help the colony. The individual ant, while running around doing his own thing, shares the information of where the food is. Same thing with the bee, same thing with the with the mycelium. And then they are, of course, there's no single point of failure. So actually, if you rub off a piece of where the ant trail is, it'll figure out some other ants will be running around, and at some point will establish their trail. Same thing with mycelium. I mean, it's spread out. You can't, and that's the issue with over concentration of power. When you create systems that are hierarchical, that have single points of authority. So the dinosaur's brain, so you get this huge mass that moves with all the central controls up here. So, when it goes big time, And so if you want to create surviving systems through periods of shock, and we just discussed that we're going to be in the next 5 years, some pretty interesting convulsions will happen through the global system. Then you want to, on the other side, create a system that replicates as much as you know about what makes it out from shocks, which is autonomous, network, cooperative, resilient, no single points of failure. So how do you, yeah.
Yeah, and so the cooperation versus competition is something I've been thinking a lot about recently. I love competition. I love playing basketball. I sometimes notice how much fun it is to just like compete. But at the same time, it's like within this cooperative framework, because you know you have the other team, but you're all just humans, like getting exercise and having fun. And same with football and everything like that. We got the World Cup right after this game. I'm going to go watch the Argentina game out in the park that I am looking at right over here. And so cooperation versus competition. Cooperation definitely feels like humans are already baked in. We've already got cooperation baked in from the very beginning, like no question, you know, groups, tribes, like that was there. You know, we had this rise of the agricultural centralized states. Those definitely feel, as you're talking about, I agree, they're sort of selfish. They're, you know, but maybe for good point, you know, because they're, you know, these agricultural civilizations that needed to store their food and guard it and all these other things. And that's like 2,000 years of history. And now, so the states are very competitive. And right now, a lot of people talk about Soviet Union versus the United States. I think that's a failed analysis of China versus the United States, because those are very, very different situations. But that do seem pretty competitive, particularly in the last 2 weeks with AI. It does feel like KYC is coming for all Americans, and it's coming potentially to use the latest state-of-the-art AIs on Claude. China just announced today, or they didn't announce, there's rumors of China doing the same thing for its state-of-the-art models. And so sort of creating nation state-based access to AI. I definitely know that KYC is coming because I just got hit with it in the last couple months. I lost my Facebook account about 1 to 2 months ago. I've now lost my Instagram account, all because they're trying to do KYC on me. Track it back to 2025. There's a Supreme Court case that has essentially allowed the US government to do KYC for everything. I've already, like, Argentina's already KYC'd me a bunch. So like, and this is maybe, yeah, like you have some insight into some of the other states. It feels like all the other states were already there. America is like the last one because we have these really important civil liberties in the 1990s that got dismantled in the 2000s with the rise of social media. And now it's coming full circle. I'm excited to just see how far I can stay out of that system as I build my own network tools. I love America. I don't want to give up my citizenship at all. I love my country. And that's not even like a question. I'm now here in Argentina, and I just got my residency for Argentina. So I'm now, this is the first country where I've been able to establish a secondary residency, even though I've lived in a lot of different countries. I'd never planned on living there before. And so Argentina is a little bit different. So we can go into what you just said about all that different stuff, because now I've had to establish a relationship with an entity. I just figured out how to pay my taxes this morning, which is really interesting, to just go through this entire system, which I should also be clear is now being networked by Palantir. So Palantir is now into these systems and is basically building all the stuff they do for all the other countries. Now, it's there's all these entities, but Argentina is bigger than a small state. It's like 40 million people, 45 million people. It's like it's a powerful state.
Middle power. The middle power.
Our middle power, tons of soft power, and soft power growing from a state of like not too much soft power to all of a sudden like a lot of soft power, similar to Brazil over the last 20 years. And yeah, so I just threw a lot at you. Anything pop out at you? Anything you want to respond to?
Yeah. So I'm going to take it back up a little from the nuances of the circumstances that you described and the individual choices that people have to make. And what I want to take it back up to is the idea that if you have a fundamental view that billions of years of evolutionary data is giving you insight into what works over a period of time, and if you buy the argument that distributed, autonomous, no single point of failure systems will work, how do you transition from where we are to where we're going to need to go? And the current actions that states are taking are sort of defaults happening as a result of their kind of previous frameworks. So you got to kind of that what's happening today is just normal behavior for states.
Yeah.
And they're just using more tools that they have at their disposal to do what is the norm. And you've got to park what is happening as part of that process from what is an ideal structure that you want. So the ideal structure you want, again, going back to the evolutionary argument, is you want a distributed set of networked, autonomous, cooperative states with no single points of failure. So this is very important. So the question, and the if when I go back to those numbers that I gave you, that 200 of those, the states and economies in the world, of them, 162 of them are small states. And small states are interesting because who do you think is more interested in or able to be adaptable, resilient, autonomous, a large, cumbersome global player or a small state? And who's most interested in a rule-based order that everybody subscribes to? Small states.
Wait. So
this is interesting. No, so who is interested at the end of the day is a powerful. So the most in the jungle, the one that has the most power does not want to be constrained by some set of artificial rules that constrains the power of the most powerful. But it is the smaller creatures in the jungle that actually, and this is one of the great contributions that humanity made in terms of civilization, that we said, look, we're going to come up with this thing that we're going to create, which is going to be called a set of rules. And then we're going to have everybody subscribe to those set of rules. And that's what we call civilization. And now, whether you're powerful or weak, handicapped or not, you have access to those rules. And so a rule-based global order essentially is most beneficial to smaller, weaker players than it is to the powerful, because the powerful essentially would get constrained by it. Now, what is interesting is the rich small states have an even greater interest in a rule-based order than poor small states, right? Because if you're a poor small state, you're just used to being abused. So you're like, listen, man, abuse is my middle name. So no matter what happens, I get abused. It's the rich small states that actually are the most interested in rules because they are the ones that have something to lose. You follow the argument there?
Yeah, and so and it feels like the rich ones are because of property rights, right?
So we're going to come to that issue about property rights and rights in general, but basically, and I want to give you one other data point, which is that if you take the 200 small states and economies in the world and you rank them not by GDP, but by per capita GDP. Why? If you have $1 billion in GDP and you have 1 billion people, you have $1 a person. That doesn't give you a lot to play with. But if you have $1 billion in GDP and 1 million people, it gives you $1,000 to play with. And if you're a small place, then you actually have $1,000 to play with, not only domestically, but internationally. So the point is that small, rich states have more available to play in the global system than large, wealthy states. So, as I said, a small rich state has interests that are bigger than its own state because it's small. It actually is. If you're Switzerland, or if you're Monaco, or if you're Liechtenstein, or if you're Singapore, if you're Qatar or UAE or Israel or Guyana, you're really interested in what the heck's going on in your neighborhood. I mean, you can't just basically, I don't care what happens elsewhere. So of the 200 states and economies, if you take the top 20, the 20 richest by per capita GDP, how many do you think are small states? Is it 2? Is it 5? So small states are countries with populations or economies with 12 million or less. The 20 richest ones by per capita GDP with the most money to play with, of those 20, how many are small states? 3, 5, 10, 15, what out of the 20 most?
I'll say 4.
Yeah. So when I was asked this question from my team, I said 7. It's 17. Wow. Whoa. 85%. So notice these numbers. Something like 60+% of all countries and economies are small states, and 75%, 85% of the 20 richest are small states. And they are the most interested in a rule-based global order, and they have the resources to
Okay, that's
create
super.
a global architecture that is autonomous, networked, no single points of failure, resilient, adaptable, and uh, the small states also have interests with other small states. And in the financial markets, and that's the last point that connects to what I'm doing on the financial markets, we have created over the years these things called asset classes. You know, we have equities as asset shares, stocks as asset class, bonds as asset class, real estate as asset class. In 1981, we created a new asset class where we took the third world and we pooled it into one asset class and we call it emerging markets.
Yeah,
Until then,
interesting.
we didn't have an asset
Yeah.
class called emerging markets. And what's super interesting is that you have 60-70% of all economies are small states. 85% of the top 20 richest are small states. Small states have all the characters that we described with the mycelium, etc. And there's no small states asset class. And that's what we're building.
Okay, cool. Awesome. I like that. Oh man, because yeah, I love going into international finance. We have Bank of International Settlements. Did I get that name right? BIS, Bank of International Settlements. We've got, oh man, it's been a while since I've gone into the history on these guys. And IMF, of course, I've been thinking a lot about the IMF as it relates to Argentina because there's such an interesting relationship between the IMF and the IMF and Argentina, and we're seeing the sort of tail end of that or new evolution in that relationship. Now, small states, international capital, these guys are huge in terms of GDP per capita, but small states. And it reminds me of the information age and the role that finance and money has in the information age. Definitely feels like finance is information. The Medicis seem like the first people who got the information age. It feels like those guys were like the
Totally.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
Phoenicians, actually trading communities, the Phoenicians, the Medicis, all of them. So basically, the first group of people who kind of sort of figured out that trade, money, information, arbitrage was of value were coming from small city states and small neighborhoods. And they figured it out and they became phenomenally wealthy. We ended up, aggregating them into larger and larger constructs to make from the small states of Italy to Italy as a whole,
Yeah.
and then to the European Union and all that. And my underlying argument is that look, we've run the course on that, and evolutionary data tells us that small is beautiful, and small, nimble, adaptable, flexible, no single points of failure is what evolutionary data tells us is what makes it out to the other side. From an investment perspective, what's super interesting is if you create a small states asset class, you get global diversification and the lack of correlation. And these are sort of the dreams for large investors. So pension funds and sovereign funds and endowments. And so large long-term investors are interested in diversified uncorrelated assets. So you get this very cool set of circumstances where you can create this asset class of small states, which has all the characteristics that we know from evolutionary data that makes it out to the other side, that supports the idea of sort of rule-based global order, autonomy, network cooperation, no single points of failure, interested in what happens not only in your own domestic circumstance, but what happens next door. All of those characteristics, while at the same time offering large investors, pension funds and sovereign funds, a globally diversified, potentially uncorrelated asset class. So now we're marrying what is good from an evolutionary perspective with the current reality of where markets are.
That's interesting. Okay. Uncorrelated asset. What do you mean by uncorrelated
So
asset?
basically what you want, so if you have $100 and you want to put that to work, you don't want, if you put $100 into or two stocks, one is, one's a technology stock and the other one is also a technology stock. What happens is that if the technology sector is affected, the whole thing moves together, right? So what you want is that if you're going to put, you may be wiser to put $50 into technology and $50 into something that is very not technology, so that if shit hits the fan, so to speak, and the technology sector is really impacted, your other thing saves you. So what you want is, you don't want correlated assets, because if everything moves together, you're going to lose everything at the same time. And so a hedging strategy is to have uncorrelated assets. So if supposing all your money is parked in the US, then something happens to the US, or all your money is parked in China, everything happens. So what you want is, you're like, okay, I want to put 75% of my resources into China and 25% into something that goes, is not correlated with China or something. So this is diversification is a very important piece of an investment strategy. And so if you diversify, and you think you've diversified, but you ended up putting them in 5 things that move together, you've not diversified. They're all correlated.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And we live in such an interesting time for this question I'm about to ask related to cryptocurrencies. And when I say cryptocurrencies, I mean Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a few other sort of players. The ones that I like are Link and Cardano and a few other ones. But also a lot of sort of grifting and scams and other things like that, which we don't need to get into. But Bitcoin seems the most sort of relevant to talk to, been around the longest, sort of, but has always remained correlated to tech stocks, which makes sense. And is in very strange situations right now with Michael Saylor now doing what he said he wouldn't do and selling Bitcoin. Now, but then we have the markets, and something that came up in a couple of recent podcasts is stock exchange. So NASDAQ was started, I believe, in the 90s, around when you were in Silicon Valley. But then you have the Dow Jones, and those are the sort of like, and they're all wrapped up with this dollar, this giant infinite milkshake theory dollar that's just like sucking out all the reserves from all the other countries and requiring them to use dollars. And then now it's all wrapped up with cryptocurrency. Not cryptocurrency, with stable coins. And it's just such a crazy thing to track. But why would somebody start a stock exchange? Are you starting a stock exchange? If you are starting a stock exchange, where would it be? What's going on? And like, is there some, if you're not doing any of this stuff, is there someone else doing this for the small state?
Yeah. So basically, we're coming from a sort of like I said, looking at billions of years of evolutionary data, and then taking that and pulling back down to reality. And what is it that in the current system gives us the closest approximation to what survives? And the closest approximation to what survived was a small state asset class. So that's the framing for us of whatever we do. A small state asset class allows us to basically create autonomous, network, cooperative, no single points of failure, resilient, adaptable systems. And what's interesting is, in financial markets, you also want geographic diversification. You don't want everything to be in Latin America, everything to be in Asia. You want things to be spread out. And the nice thing is, small states are spread globally, in the Caribbean, Uruguay, and others in Paraguay and Guyana and Suriname and all the Caribbean ones. But you also have 41% of Africa, they're small states. You've got the rich ones in Europe, like 41% of Africa is small states. Shocking. Yeah. So most people don't know this stuff. And Europe has the oldest, wealthiest small states, whether it's Finland or Denmark or the Baltics or Switzerland or Monaco or Liechtenstein being the wealthiest of small states. But then you've got them in the Gulf, Israel and Cyprus and Qatar and UAE and Bahrain and Kuwait. And then, of course, in the Indian Ocean, Mauritius and Maldives and Brunei and Hong Kong and Singapore and New Zealand. So you've got global diversification, and they are not, some of them, when you put them together, not correlated with some of the big markets. So you also have that. So my point is that that's the box. So the boundary of what we're doing is inside this box of countries with populations and economies of populations 12 million or less. So in there, we're going to touch a lot of stuff. We believe that the way that you do capital mobilization, how do you mobilize capital for investing in projects? We're going to be doing stuff in the capital mobilization space that we think is going to be very cool. The way you do ratings and indices for performance of corporates and countries, we think that small states deserve their own approach to this, and we're going to develop that process of rating and indexing of public and private architecture in small states. And then we'd also think there's going to be a lot of origination, mergers, acquisitions among small states because of this chaos that's coming over there.
Or are you saying that small states are going to acquire other small states, or that businesses are going to be acquired?
Yeah. So there's going to. I'll give you one of the answer to that. So there's going to be a lot of cross small state activity, because what's going to happen is that when you're coming from if you're coming from Uruguay, and it is far more easy to have a conversation with somebody in New Zealand or in Singapore than it is in Brazil. I mean, so for you to talk to a family, if you're a leading family business in Montevideo and you're talking to somebody in Minas Gerais or in São Paulo, it's a completely different conversation than if you have it with somebody who's, from Singapore, because they understand it. They recognize your realities, that, your circumstances. So we expect that families from small states are going to find enormous language between each other. And we half jokingly say that we're going to set up, and we already tried it out with a few families from different places. And in 2027, we hope to bring these families from small states, and we cheekily call it the Davos for small states, sort of bringing them together and giving them a chance to kind of, understand each other's circumstances, each other's thing. And again, it's sort of like bringing, if you want to call it the mycelium colony, like the different myceliums, bringing them together and saying, hey, listen, what are you doing that experiment on that tree over there? Can I do it on this tree over here? So that knowledge sharing, we think, is going to be a very big, powerful piece of our overall approach. What technology and AI is doing is just giving us unbelievable capabilities in this moment, unbelievable capabilities to see stuff, analyze stuff. The idea of exchanges, I mean, this is basically, the underlying concept is straightforward, which is that you have a bunch of disparate buyers of stuff and a number of people of sellers of stuff, and you need to bring them together. And that's, physically used to be done under a buttonwood tree in New York, and then early on in the Netherlands. And they brought the traders together and they basically exchanged stuff and information and hung out. We replicated that in a physical way in the stock exchanges. And at some point, the securities dealer said, hey, wait a second, why don't we create a technology-enabled exchange as opposed to a physical exchange? That's the beginning of NASDAQ. So now there's no reason why this kind of a exchange should sit physically in any one location. I expect that because fundamentally what it is about buying and selling and meeting of pairs. That's going to happen phenomenally, because there'll be a lot of common interest, and we're going to be involved in the facilitation of that exchange of information, ideas. But the thing about, keep going back to this notion that you don't want single points of failure. You want distributed mechanisms. So one of the things about the internet that was phenomenal was that, the TCP/IP protocol was a distributed network. And the same thing with Bitcoin to some extent, with some of its flaws, but conceptually, it was sort of like distributing that autonomy to individuals to make the choices. That's the framework that is going to be embodied into everything that we're going to do in the small state asset class. Because why? Because of course it makes a lot of money, because it creates value, but because we see billions of years of evolutionary data telling us that systems that make it out through shocks are the ones that are autonomous, distributed, networked, cooperative, and don't have single points of failure. So that's the kind of the template that we're using to do some stuff that is very pragmatic.
So, for the last 10 or 15 minutes, it would be fun to talk about where the individual sits in that. I've been thinking a lot from the philosophical angle of where does the individual fit within the nation state, particularly as my nation state makes it harder to makes it harder for me to do things, just like paying insurance and other things. So I just think about it constantly. And then I think about the community and how the community itself, when I say local community, I don't necessarily mean in my local world, which I love. I love Argentines. I love hanging out with Argentines. I do have a local network of Argentines, but it's also now global. It's just like, growing up, traveling everywhere, it's like a global network of people. But in this we can come from the angle of the sovereign individual and the sort of network state type of philosophies, which just show this. There was a Rand paper, I believe in 2006 or 2009, talking about the rise of neo-medievalism. And I went and read that paper. It seems like it was pretty clear that that's what's going on. And, we can take it back to your framework, because medieval feudalism, like feudal lords, feudal territories, and all sort of competing, some cooperating, some competing, kind of coming together in this really interesting way. Now, where does the individual fit in all this? I guess you have to ask which individual. But yeah, what do you think about the individual, the community, and the nation state?
Hugely. And I am obsessed with the idea that both for pragmatic reasons and even some spiritual reasons, I actually think that the individual is the one that essentially has to sit at the core of all of this. And that's where the individual autonomy, the ability to sort of act and be able to unleash the creativity of the individual is the nirvana goal. And I think that is something that we were unable to do until now. And the good use of AI would be to allow that to happen. And this is where we are very focused on the concept that we can take, a small group of 2-3 young people in Gabon, in Libreville, and give them access to the best legal advice, the best consulting advice, the best financial advice that they could ever imagine in the language of choice because of AI. We can actually, because now they have the infrastructure is in place, meaning the more or less internet access is generally universal. The devices are in place, so mobility is there. And young people around the world have been, of course, TikTok and other Instagram and all that and social media was the way to on-ramp them into the system, which wasn't always very healthy. But nevertheless, it's now there. The thing is that the dream, and that's what we are focused on, is that there will be people distributed globally with lots of creative ideas. What they lacked was they didn't have access to the machinery to take their ideas and execute them. So the soulpreneur, the idea that an individual can become a conglomerate, is visible now. And that's our sort of real dream, is to basically allow the individual to take their creative mind and not let it get consumed by the mechanics of building stuff, but actually the execution of that. And I think what AI and agents in AI are going to do is basically allow people to do that. So that's sort of the optimistic way in which we're addressing it. And we think that, in small places, we'll be able to pivot things faster. Like, for example, in a large place, just to get regulatory clarity, it takes you, 3 years, executive, legislative, judicial, different groups of power centers brawling with each other. In a small place, it's a dinner. I mean, if you know the right people and you can sit them down, they can actually recognize, they may even say no to you, but how much more valuable is a quick no than a 3-year maybe? And if you can point this out and you can say, listen, this allows your society to actually be part of, unleash your creativity. I mean, if you look at what Singapore did, for example, by basically, they had nothing but, not even the sand they had to buy. But what they did was they unleashed the creativity and created the structures for allowing their people to excel. That today is accessible to everybody. And that's the goal, is to basically allow, like I said, 5 kids in Libreville in Gabon, or in Eswatini in Africa, or in Guyana or Suriname or Guyana or Uruguay, or you name it. In Israel or Palestine or Qatar or Singapore or Liechtenstein, allowing the individual to have access to a set of tools, AI enabled, that gets them the best McKinsey insight into their issue, the best legal advice, the best contract structures, best access to capital that they could not even have imagined. And now the real distinguishing factor is going to be the creativity of their mind.
Yeah, 100%. I've got a little demo I can do. I won't be able to turn it on. Unfortunately, I should prepare it for every podcast. But this is ESP32, and this is a screen that I've attached, both $5. This is a computer. This is a screen. So this is, in effect, a proto-smartphone. All I would need to do is hook up this speaker and microphone, and then hook up this camera, and then I would have a smartphone. I'm still far away from figuring out how to do that one. But I've got this one down, and we're teaching people how to do these, how to build all these things. It's $10 for this thing. So, and why is that relevant? Well, this would have been completely impossible for me 3 years ago to get this set up. But now I can, with my AI, get the software on this guy, and then that lights up this screen, and then the AI just does a lot of it. The only thing I'm limited by is my creativity now. And I know there's a lot of other people in the same boat, and the people in the small states are going to be really interesting. Could get really pretty sort of, I guess utopian is the word for it, in the small states, is because this experimentation could also get dystopian as well, I guess.
Absolutely. Listen, that's the optimistic outcome from this period. Is where we unleash unbelievable creativity across the globe, and the individual sits at the center of this. And we have a marketplace that is basically taking good ideas being generated by individuals around the world, and essentially through that networked framework, allowing all these ideas to germinate. And that's exactly what mycelium did. There were all these individual myceliums going about doing their stuff and created solutions. The same thing the ants did. The individual explorer ants ran around looking for stuff. The same thing the bees do. The same. Every system that has survived, and especially shocks, has autonomous, networked, creative mechanisms. And that's fine. I think we have the early glimmers of being able to produce that kind of a framework for Homo sapiens.
That's super interesting. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can our listeners find out more about you and your work?
So if you go to www.SAC, which stands for Small State Asset Class, -holding with no S.com, SAC-holding.com, they'll see, and there's a two-minute videos that if you watch them, you will have a sense of what we're doing very much in the financial space. But from this conversation, you will understand that it's anchored into a much larger view of what evolutionary information and data shows us as guidance.
So interesting. Thank you so much.